Good morning. My name is King Bang, and I'm Dean of the School of Public Affairs at St. Cloud State. Saying that mostly for the purpose of the recording we're making of this program today. We have the opportunity to talk about the earthquakes, two earthquakes about 9 hours apart. One is 7.8, the other is 7.5. Massive earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria. It's been a long time project of one of our faculty in SOPA, our political science professor, Dr. Pat Bodelson, to look at disaster preparedness, disaster relief efforts, and she's conducted courses in that area for a long time. I also thought, though, that we might want some input from someone who studies earthquakes, who's involved in geology, and so we were not able to get someone to be with us live, but Professor of Geology and Earth Sciences from the College of Science and Engineering, Dr. Sarah Gibson, has given us a recording we can use to look at the seismological issues of the earthquake and what's happened there. And so, without further ado, I'm gonna ask my team to put that video up for you and give you a chance to watch it. This is again Dr. Sarah Gibson from Atmospheric and Hydrological Sciences.
And today I want to talk about the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. I want to talk about why it's occurring, where it is occurring, and why it is so intense. It's obviously a devastating, disastrous event. 11,000 people have died, at least as of the time of I'm talking to you now. Probably thousands more will be dead and injured, and countless people have been displaced and affected by this. And it's a pretty intense event. We have the first earthquake was a magnitude 7.8 on the what's called moment magnitude scale. And that's just a measure of the amount of shaking, the amount of displacement in the Earth's crust. It's just a way of measuring the intensity of the earthquake. 4 minutes after that was a magnitude 6.5 earthquake aftershock. So aftershocks are earthquakes that follow the main event. And then 9 hours later, we had a magnitude 7.5 earthquake along the same fault line. So this area has been ravaged by multiple horrific, high intensity earthquakes that have completely devastated the region. And so I want to talk about what is it about this region that makes it prone to earthquakes. To know why, we need to understand why earthquakes occur where they are. And this map kind of shows you the distribution of many earthquakes over decades. The yellow dots represent individual earthquakes. And what you may notice is that these earthquakes follow along kind of linear paths or in trending in general regions. And these paths, these outlines are what we call tectonic plates. Okay? So the Earth's surface is covered in a series of tectonic plates that all either crash into one another or pull apart from one another or move side to side. So they slide past one another back and forth. So what you can see from this map are all of these different plates and indicating the directions that they're moving. So these plates are really brittle. They're being pushed around by the Earth's mantle, which is a solid flowing plastic underneath, but it moves and it's pushing the plates on the surface around as well. And so they move and they either crash into one another, pull apart. When they're pushing into one another or moving side to side, at these brittle plates, we're talking about kilometers worth of rock in the crust, and it's brittle and they don't just want to slide easily, and so they push and they have these forces that press into one another, and those forces and those stresses will eventually let go and subside, and you get a release of energy in the form of seismic waves, and those are earthquakes. So if you look at this map with these tectonic plates, you have the African plate in green and the Arabian plate, which includes Syria and Iraq and Iran, and then the Eurasian plate, which includes all of Europe and Asia. And then in between those, sandwiched between them, is the Anatolian plate. and the Anatolian plate is where Turkey is. So we'll come back to that in a second. Now, I mentioned that earthquakes are a release of seismic waves in the ground. Where that energy gets released within the crust is called the focus. And so it is a release of seismic energy, these waves in all directions, either into the crust and out upwards towards the surface. Where the earthquake manifests at the surface is called the epicenter. And that's where we experience the shaking, is at the epicenter. So how intense the earthquake can be really kind of depends on how deep the earthquake is within the crust. So a deeper earthquake, it can occur, hundreds of kilometers or so down into the crust, but then by the time that energy, those waves get to the surface, it could be a smaller earthquake. But the difference with this Turkey earthquake specifically is that the focus is very close to the epicenter. So that red dot, if you picture it just a few miles or closer to the surface, that's what happened here. And that's why the amount of damage and intensity and shaking is so devastating in this earthquake in particular. Now, this region is not immune to earthquakes. It has been hit by earthquakes for centuries, if not millennia. And that map is showing the magnitudes of major earthquakes since 1900. And so you can see dozens and dozens of earthquakes have occurred in the region. The larger circles are magnitude 6 or greater. And the red dots, the red solid dots, indicate the recent earthquakes. And so they occurred along the East Anatolian Fault, which is a strike slip zone, which just means that the Earth's crust is moving kind of side to side like this, not up or down. But this region is not immune to earthquakes. They've had them before, as I mentioned. Istanbul was hit by a major earthquake in 2020. And you can see a lot of serious large magnitude earthquakes have occurred along the North Anatolian Fault. But that region, they are aware of the magnitude of earthquakes they are susceptible to. And so they have more earthquake resistant measures in place. However, along the East Anatolian Fault in southeastern Turkey, close to Syria, this region is not as well developed and has not experienced the magnitude of earthquakes like this in their past. If you look closely, most of the earthquakes that have occurred there are relatively small diameter circles, meaning that they're smaller magnitude, so less intense. These earthquakes, like I said, this is an anomaly for this region to have such an intense earthquake. Now, they occurred, the first major one occurred in the middle of the night, so people were at home. The buildings there are not, most of them are not ready to withstand earthquake shaking. They're not earthquake resistant. And so there's been a lot of crumbling of buildings and collapse of buildings. As I say, earthquakes don't kill people, humans do, meaning that it's our own structures and that are the major cause of the death toll. And so that kind of summarizes the geology of this region. The African plate, which is right here next to me, and the Arabian plate on the far right of the screen, they're generally moving kind of northwards towards the Eurasian plate, and this Anatolian block's just kind of sandwiched in between all of them. So it's kind of an area of converging plates coming together and plates sliding past one another. So it's devastating to see an earthquake of this intensity in such a poor region. To see the death toll from it, it's heartbreaking. And so I hope we can learn from the science of this earthquake to prepare for potential earthquakes like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, and thank you to Professor Gibson for her video and for producing that. These are pop-up seminars. I mean, the earthquake happened on Sunday. We decided on Monday we were going to try to do this, and Dr. Gibson was able to provide us with some of her production and her research within 48 hours. It's pretty remarkable how that happens. I now want to turn to my colleague in the School of Public Affairs, Dr. Patricia Bodelson, who longtime professor of political science, and I'll say as well, longtime colleague and friend, I would argue even, who's done coursework in disaster preparedness, disaster response, and disaster policies. She's currently working in Athens in Greece and continuing her research. She has brought a Fulbright fellow to study disaster preparedness here to St. Cloud State, and now she's working with those partners, and I think with others as well, that she may tell you about during her comments in Athens. And so I know it's got to be about 6 o'clock your time there, a little after 6. So thank you. Good evening, Pat, and please take it away.
All right, a little after 7, as a matter of fact.
Ah.
Okay, so I don't know how to do my PowerPoint here, but do you manage it from where you are today?
Yes, I think she will. She will for you. So just tell her when you want to advance.
Okay, so let's go to the NIMS model. Let's advance to that right away, because this is a PowerPoint that I use when I'm teaching in Athens, either public officials or the students. And we've been doing a simulation with the students here now for the last couple of years. But what we do is we try to work with the NIMS model, the National Incident Management System. And that was set up in the United States, really codified after Katrina. And what it talks about is how you should manage something once an earthquake happens. But I want to digress a little bit, because what Dr. Gilbert said, is it Gilberts or Gilbertson? I'm sorry.
Gibson.
Gibson. Okay. She's right. It's not earthquakes that kill, it's people that kill. And when you talk about the mitigation or the preparation for an earthquake, in southern Turkey, northern Syria, there is far less preparation. And it's not simply because of the geography, but also based on the population. Population tends to be a Kurdish population, which is isolated by the country of Turkey. And then you've got Syria. And in that area of Syria, there are the rebel territory, and it's controlled not necessarily by the government. So there's all these things about people and the response to the earthquake that are phenomenal. So when you look at the NIMS model starts out with an incident commander. And theoretically, if there was an earthquake here in Athens, the mayor's office would become responsible immediately for the earthquake. As it expanded, it might be that a regional person takes over the incident command role, and then every municipality falls underneath their jurisdiction. That's not happening in Syria or in Turkey at this point in time. And that is a major problem in terms of what's getting done or what isn't getting done. The other thing that Dr. Gibson talked about was the fact that it was a shallow earthquake. So it was more devastating. But when you look at the television and the sites of what's going on, there are buildings that have crumbled and then tall skyscrapers next to them. Now, I thought that it would be that the older buildings were crumbling, but it's not. And the way they are now doing their analysis of what buildings are having the problem is based on when they were built and what administration was in charge during the building codes and the reinforcement. And that's a major issue in Athens too. When you get a flat in Athens, you want to know when it was built, and then you go back in the records and find out who was the prime minister at that point in time, or was it during the dictatorship, which was from 1967 to 1974. And so the building codes were different too. And so there's reasons why you'd want to be in one building or another. But theoretically, when the disaster happens, the incident command person comes out, they take care of the safety, they'll surround the area, they will prevent looting, they will organize which teams go to which site. So you'll know, let's say that the white helmets are going to go to 2 municipalities or 2 buildings in a municipality. And there will be very good communication and coordination between the groups. The biggest problem in every disaster that I have examined or researched has been communication. There was a major fire here in Greece in 2018 where over 200 people died. And it was primarily the communications problem. And the people were told, the police were told where to have people exit. And it was the wrong road, and it was a road that was blocked. And then there was a cruise ship that came in and unloaded cargo and cars, trucks, etc., into the only parking place where people could have put their cars to get out of the fire. The same is what happened on 9/11 between the fire and the police department. They had different wavelengths, so the police department knew the second tower was going to fall. They didn't know how to communicate that to the fire department. That is just the beginning, though, of what's going on in the aftermath of the earthquake right now. First of all, there's the unstable government of Syria. The area in Syria where the earthquake occurred has been the site of a lot of bombs, explosions, etc. And that's why the White Helmets are there trying to help people get out. And the White Helmets are a voluntary organization that is not being coordinated with the country of Syria. And then the issue in Syria is also who's going to send in troops and who's going to allow NGOs to come in and be helpful. And that's another major issue because the Red Crescent can't go in without Bashar Assad's permission. And the White Helmets are in there without permission of the government. And so they are afraid that there could be bombs while they're trying to dig people out of the rubble, which is a major issue that's hard to even believe. And at the same time, it's extremely cold and communications are down. And Erdogan and Turkey have stopped Twitter, at least temporarily, because there were so many complaints about government fraud and lack of mitigation or enforcement of building codes in the area. And Sarah alluded to that too, that the building codes in that part of Turkey are not as stringent, they're not as strict. And I would say it's not simply because there are less earthquakes there. It's a different population. And of course, I'm political science. So the politics of what happens is also very important to me when I look at this. And so what we look at is, we have the NIMS model. Now, when my students and I came to Athens in 2019 to analyze the 2018 fire, one of the first questions the students asked is, where is your major disaster alert program? And why do you have 5 911 numbers? And to my students' credit, and I'm not sure if they did all of that. Yeah, this is lovely. But they had 5 911 numbers. So if I was having a heart attack and I dialed one of the emergency numbers, if it was the wrong number, I would have to hang up and dial again. And since then, since 2019, they now have a national alert that is into every cell phone that's got a phone number in the in the country of Greece. So last week when we had a snowstorm, by our standards, we had a bit of a dusting, quite frankly. But when the snow was coming, I got an alert on my phone immediately. If there is an earthquake coming now, and if it's an earthquake of a certain magnitude, we immediately get notification on our cell phones. That is a big piece of communications and information that really has to be handled. Here we look at the resource management, and that also is a major problem right now in Turkey. And that's because, at least from what the BBC is reporting, Reuters is reporting, and people with the United Nations, there's been a serious resource mismanagement on the part of Turkey. And the complaints about that, again, cut down the communications, closed off communications for several people. And in terms of resource management in Syria, we have sanctions on Syria, so they have limited resources to start out with. Then they have problems in terms of communications, in terms of heating, all kinds of things. And so right now, you'll hear on TV that people are coming in droves and that we're sending things. In a crisis management situation, and there's an excellent book called Crisis Caravan that did an analysis of the crisis management of Haiti after that major earthquake. And what they found is if you send goods like, clothing, warm clothes, or if you send pharmaceuticals, and a lot of times the pharmaceuticals expire before they get to the hands of the people who need them. If you send that, it tends to get all bogged down. The best way to contribute is to contribute to a reputable NGO money. Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders. The White Helmet now has opened up a page where you can donate to that organization. But the fact, if you send money, they can provide vouchers. They can find a place for people to stay. The Red Cross in the United States, if your house has a fire, they will provide you with a hotel room immediately and a voucher to go somewhere for a place to stay. So again, the idea of sending all kinds of resources in the forms of goods is almost gets in the way rather than being helpful. And so you really have to be careful in terms of those kinds of things. And in terms of resources, we talk about things like when Hurricane Sandy came, one of the incident commanders from Brooklyn Park went to New York to help out. And he was immediately given a credit card and told to go get temporary lighting for all the places so that the crime would be reduced. That's not the kind of thing that's happening right now. And, when King contacted me, and Renee, and it seemed like a great idea to look at this, the more I study it, the more I realize that the politics of the situation and the lack of resources and management is making it almost unbearable to even watch it unfold on television. And so again, you're supposed to have mitigation. That's supposed to be the big piece. One of the places that would be of interest are the dams in Northern California, because we know that those dams are not in that good a shape right now, but the state's not putting money into it because, mitigation, if you mitigate something and it never happens, you don't get any political clout for it. The levees in New Orleans, they knew those levees couldn't sustain a hurricane of the magnitude of Katrina, but they played their card that perhaps that hurricane would never come. And so mitigation is a thankless way to put your money into disaster management, but it is the key. And they're doing analysis already now about let's look at that. I love how we keep changing these today. I'm having a great time with it. But the mitigation becomes the issue. And a lot of times people feel like it's going to be cheaper to clean up the mess than it is to mitigate, to prevent it. But when you talk to the people from San Francisco now and Los Angeles, and they look at this earthquake that they're having now in Turkey and Syria, they claim at least that their building codes and their buildings could sustain up to an 8.0 magnitude earthquake. And according to what I'm getting from the World Health Organization and from the Doctors Without Borders, there were buildings that could sustain this earthquake that barely have a crack in them. But of course, the wealthier people live in those buildings. Those buildings were built when there was probably a little bit less fraud in the government. And so there's a lot going on here that's not just digging out the rubble. The roads to these towns are not as well kept as roads to major metropolitan areas. And they just got heavy equipment into the major epicenter within the last 24 hours. So it took a while to even get equipment in there to start digging out the rubble. Although just as I came to start here, they found a mother and her 4-year-old still alive in the rubble and pulled her out. So they are still finding some people alive, but they say that after the first 2 hours of an earthquake, the chances of survival dropped by over 50% already. So, and this one, the World Trade Center, the first World Trade Center, we had no NIMS. And then we didn't have it for 9/11. And then by the time Katrina came, we had it and it didn't work. But for Hurricane Sandy, when they implemented the NIMS model, it was effective. And that's why there were less deaths and rebuilding occurred much more rapidly. Do we have another slide or what should we do here? Oh, this is a big one. There is a democratic process prior to the disaster. And during that democratic process, the group or the process picks the incident commander. So in St. Cloud, if there's a disaster, it's the FEMA person who works at the county. Now in St. Cloud, when we had the H1N1 virus, that was a ways back now, but anyway, immediately behind closed doors, the public health department and the person from infectious disease in the public health department became the incident commander. It was very smooth, it worked very nicely. And then that incident commander becomes very authoritarian. They tell people where to go, what to do, etc. When there was the Ebola outbreak in not in Minneapolis, when there was the Ebola outbreak, Brooklyn Park had the highest Liberian population of anywhere outside of Liberia. And the incident commander for Brooklyn Park wanted to take on the role. And they had a significant conflict with the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. And that really diminished the efficiency of how to respond to the outbreak. So what you have to do is figure out ahead of time, who's your incident commander? And interestingly enough, the White Helmets have gone through that whole process, and they have, in the last 2 years, had meetings, decided who would be the incident commander, how many people would go to each point. And so if you go on television now and you watch what they're doing with this disaster, you'll see that the people in the White Helmets are very well organized and very concise. Now people are coming in from Switzerland with dogs, and they interviewed the woman with the dogs. And she said, we don't know where to go. So we just found some rubble. Which, I mean, what else can you do? But that there was nobody there to direct them or to have a grid of this is the area we're looking at, this is where we're going to go next. And I think that's making things, again, like Sarah said, where people are killing, not the earthquake itself. So do we have another slide? Okay, yeah. See, what I wanted to do with NIMS when I came here, and it doesn't have to be NIMS, okay? I don't have money in the company, anything like that, but I wanted the EU to look at a model for disaster response that each country could stay with, ascribe to, so that it could be an umbrella could come in. And so if we said, you know, it's on the Turkey-Syrian border, we have the NIMS model. Turkey has more resources in terms of people, money, equipment. So therefore, the incident commander will be from Turkey, and they will manage the entire disaster area. And that would work very well, because I mean, it's like interstate in the United States. Europe is small compared to the United States. And so if the countries could coordinate with each other, and there was, oopsie, I don't know what that was, but there was a plane crash here in France when I was here. And the people in Greece could not believe how quickly the French rescue team got to the site, identified all of the victims from the crash, and had everybody evacuated from there within 48 hours. They did not disturb the site in terms of, you know, studying the crash and that type of thing. But, you know, I said to the Greeks, you should pay attention to that, because especially in an airline accident, it's easier to identify the people. And why is that? Because they usually have their passport or some kind of ID in their pocket, and they're usually seat belted in, you know, if a crash is coming. So it's a relatively easy disaster site in terms of identifying the victims and that type of thing. But if let's say, like even with COVID, if the World Health Organization had said, okay, we are the World Health Organization, we are going to take control of the COVID, United States, this is what we think you should do, UK, this, EU, and the world fell into line, we probably would have had a much different outcome. And even if in the United States, if we had coordinated our resources because we had a strong central incident command, that would have been helpful. And that would be, let's say, somebody at the CDC who says we need all respirators all unnecessary respirators in New York right now because that's where the outbreak is. And then as the outbreak shifted, they could move the resources. But if different levels of government, okay, from today, let's go to Zach's question. Go ahead. Do you want me to find out Zach's question?
It's actually in the Q&A button here. But I'll
Okay,
I'll
there we
read
go.
it to
I
you.
got it then. Here. How were you able? Okay, I have a Greek phone, Zach. And so I have a Greek phone number, so that's why they have it. It's automatically on my Greek phone. It's not on my US phone. So is that what you meant?
Yeah.
And then
Great.
we got another question.
We
Okay.
got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
yeah,
That's
it's only Greek phone numbers. Yep. But and that it's part of part of why people get a Greek phone number, quite
Yeah.
frankly. So
Yeah.
but yeah, no, it's just my Greek phone that does it.
So Pat, let me ask you a question based on your presentation, particularly regarding NIMS. We know that President Erdogan in the last 36 hours declared basically an emergency declaration for the provinces in the south of Turkey, which means he gets to bypass the parliament and just change laws in that particular area. Is, in your view, is this supportive of the disaster response? Or I also recognize, and you're a political scientist, so it's worth recognizing that elections are coming within in May in Turkey. So one wonders if this is something done to improve election fortunes or what have you, because as you point out right now, the early efforts right now, he's receiving some criticism for.
Oh, so first of all, you have to remember I'm in Greece,
Yeah.
and Turkey is a big threat to the Greeks. The Greek pundits and the analysts from the BBC as well as from the EU say Erdogan is doing it to silence his criticism, and that that part of Turkey is not part of his constituency. Okay, it's part of the Kurds and it's part of the group that they ostracized, shall we say. And so most people from where I'm sitting say he's doing it to silence the group, and that it's an authoritarian move to control the message coming out of that part of the country. So when he gets his votes, he gets those, excuse me, from the major metropolitan centers and not from the Kurdish population.
All right, well, good, thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Because otherwise this will sound like King giving Pat some questions like we were having a coffee somewhere.
Which is lovely also, you know.
Which can be fun, yeah, but I'm not sure other folks, if there are other questions, I'd encourage you to drop them into the Q&A, and that would be great. But if not, and maybe Pat is sort of a way to integrate the Turkish sort of a view from within Turkey. Mustafa Kaya, who was a Fulbright fellow in the economics. Well, I take that back. He was a visiting scholar here. His wife, Peran, or Hazel, as we always called her, his wife was the Fulbright that worked in the economics department. We got to know the family, and their small boy came, and they were here for about 9 months during, the pre-pandemic, but I think it was here right toward the beginning of it as well. A few years ago, he's continued to be a good friend of the program and of the university, and we stay in contact with each other. He created a video for us. He had to create the video because unlike Pat, who's probably got decent internet connections in Turkey, they're much more challenged right at the moment. So this was the best way we could connect with him. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, go ahead, Pat.
Well, I just want everybody who's listening, I'm really going to be intrigued by what he has to say, because, from where I'm sitting, and again, I don't know what prejudices are forthcoming or anything. So this should be really, really interesting. I'm
Well,
excited.
I hope so. He's trying to describe the situation there from his viewpoint.
With keeping his job, yeah.
Yeah,
So
he's at Karatay University as an instructor, as well as working as a working in the tax inspector. But he'll tell you all that at the beginning of this video. Go ahead and play it, Danae.
Hi everyone, I'm Mustafa Kaya. Greetings from Turkey. Hope your day is going well. Firstly, I want to introduce myself. I have been working as a Chief Tax Inspector at the Ministry of Finance and Treasury since 2011, and also I have been working as a lecturer at the University of Karatay since 2016. I got an associate professor position in the field of macroeconomics on September 2022. I was a visiting scholar in the Department of Economics at the St. Cloud State University 3 years ago. I would like to connect with you live today, but due to the earthquake, there are frequent power and internet cuts. Therefore, I would like to join you with a video and briefly talk about the latest station in Turkey. One of the strongest earthquakes to hit the region in a century shook residents from their beds at around 4 a.m. on Monday. On February 6, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake occurred in southern Turkey near the northern border of Syria. This quake was followed approximately 9 hours later by a magnitude 7.5 earthquake located around 59 miles to the southwest. Dozens of large aftershocks have also occurred. It's among more than 60 aftershocks recorded. The earthquake was the most devastating to hit earthquake-prone Turkey in more than 20 years and was as strong as one in 1939, the most powerful recorded there. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has announced a 3-month state of emergency is 10 provinces were affected by an earthquake that has killed thousands. The death toll in Turkey has risen to 6,500 people. The number of deaths is increasing by the hours. More than 38,000 were injured. Nearly 10,000 buildings destroyed in Turkey. Rescuers in Turkey are battling heavy rain and snow as they race against the clock to find survivors of the earthquake that struck in the early hours of Monday. Turkish authorities say some 13.5 million people were affected in an area spanning roughly 280 miles from Adana in the west to Diyarbakir in the east, and 300 kilometers from Malatya in the north to Hatay in the south. More than 12,000 Turkish search and rescue personnel are working in the affected areas, along with 9,000 troops. More than 70 countries offered rescue teams and other aid. Nearly 3,000 teams started to come from foreign countries for aid our people. Although the earthquake was felt in the city where I live, it didn't cause any destruction. Due to the earthquake, natural gas, electricity, and internet cuts are experienced in cities. There were natural gas explosions and fires took place. Transportation was interrupted because the roads were damaged. Due to the problems in the telephone networks, people cannot reach their relatives in the earthquake area. There is a shortage of food, drink, and shelter in earthquake zones. Aid campaigns have been launched from all over the country to be sent to the earthquake zone. However, Heavy winter conditions and heavy snowfall prevent and delay the arrival of aid to the region. Because of most of the hospitals in the region were damaged, the injured are being transported to hospitals in other cities. Plane companies started free flights to the region for people who want to go to help. Schools have been postponed. Universities will most likely switch to distance learning. University dormitories were prepared for those who were damaged by the earthquake. We are on the third day of rescue efforts. We expect miracles. It seems that it will take many years for the country to return to its previous good days. Since there was an earthquake intensities at the same time, there was a great turmoil after the earthquake. Disaster management will play an important role here. Our country should strategically organize its resources to reduce the damage caused by disasters. It should also adopt a systematic approach to managing disaster prevention, preparedness, response, and recovery responsibilities. From now on, it will be important to prepare for potential disasters and respond to them as quickly, strategically, and effectively as possible. Please pray for our people. Thank you for meeting me on such short notice. And also my profound thanks to Professor King Banyan, Dean of School of Public Affairs, for giving me this opportunity to evaluate. If you have any questions, please send me an email.
So thank you to Professor Kaya, Dr. Kaya, for his input. I reached out to him in the hours afterwards, not realizing that he was actually probably far enough away from the area that he was probably in a safe place, but I still was quite concerned for him and his wife and son. But they're all well. And thank you for that. I'm going to drop into the chat. Hang on a second.
May I?
I'm going to drop in the chat just the latest Reuters report so that you can keep track. The toll now, I mean, when he reported it, he says 8,000. When Dr. Bodelson reported it, talked a little while ago, numbers were around 15,000, 16,000. They're currently, these numbers are just going to go up, and we're just about at 20,000 right now. So it's really important. Dr. Bodelson, what's your reaction to Dr. Kaya's comments?
Be careful. I think it's the party line. We are systematically responding. Even Erdogan came out today and said that the systematic response is weak at best. So, I mean, I've never met this man, and maybe I am a bit, of a what kind of theory is it? Conspiracy theory. But there's been some serious problems, and there has not been a systematic response. One of the things, though, that I do want people to notice, since I do disaster, that when you see the camps where the survivors are staying, the families are together. And if it's a natural disaster and you do a camp for the survivors, you keep the families together. And if it's a man-made disaster, like a war, you split up the families and you keep the men and the women on different sides of the fire. And the fire is the big piece in the camps. And when you look on your television screen and you see the fires, if it's a systematic response, the NGO or the group responsible for the camps will have one fire in the middle, because that's where people go, not only to stay warm, but to get information. And you keep the families together if it's a natural disaster, because there's not been a huge disproportionate loss of men versus women in the disaster itself. He was interesting. He told of the facts of the situation, not any kind of an analysis or any kind of critique of the response. And I think that it's really important that we have that information also. The numbers are going to skyrocket. And again, part of the communication is down where he is because Erdogan shut it off. And again, you have to remember that the Turks and the Greeks have a long-standing conflict, if not just ideological. The number of pleats on a Turkish military kilt or skirt are the same number as the years the Turks occupied Greece. So my information is going to be probably skewed negatively in terms of the Turkish response. And, you know, if you're critically thinking, that's an important thing to remember when you get my opinion. And my opinion is based on facts that I have heard on the television, things like Reuters. But it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm absolutely right either. And that's why I want to frame it in the fact that I am in a country that has some negative feelings. And it's been interesting to me just to be here and realize some of those kinds of things and how the Greeks feel about Angela Merkel as opposed to people in the United States. And so as I speak to you, whoever you are out there, I think it's important that I let you know where I am geographically, as well as what kind of information then that I'm getting. But I do think that there's a lot more going on than simply telling us that there's been a systematic response. Thanks. Now we can go to chat, I guess.
Yeah, Dr. Bodelson, I do know that one of the things that Dr. Kaya referred to was the extreme cold there. You referenced actually at the beginning of, maybe even before we started, that it's 35 degrees Fahrenheit in Athens right now. It looks like there's snow there. It reminds me of the fact that maybe the biggest issue is not so much the buildings, but exposure at this time, right? What's the relative risk for a survivor who's living in this area right now?
Okay, if they're out of the rubble, you mean? Because
yes.
If they're out of the rubble, their survival's pretty darn good. They're cold, but it's not freezing to death cold, but it's dehydration cold. But the fear that they have right now is, and he alluded to that, is the fact that the water systems are down. So cholera is going to set in, even because it's not cold enough to kill cholera. You know, Minnesota gets cold enough to even kill ticks on a good winter. And, you know, purify the water with the freezing. It's not cold enough to kill the cholera. And because sanitation is down, that's the big fear right now, more so even than exposure.
Yeah. Okay. So I do see pictures coming from some places. I think these are from the Syrian area, the affected areas in Syria, where they have decided, you talked about the dams in Northern California. They've actually released water out of the dams in northern Syria, like along the Orontes and other rivers there. And there's tons of flooding happening in that area right now. What complications does that provide?
Well, it could kill people in the villages, you know, because it can cause flooding. If it's well controlled and regulated, it might cleanse the water and keep the water moving so that you don't get you get better potable drinking water. I'm not sure of their dam system. My guess is that they did it so the dam doesn't break. And if they did it for that reason, it can cause more loss of human lives because they did it to relieve the pressure on the dam, and it will affect people down the river.
Great. That's good to know. I'm wondering if there are any other questions coming in from our group. I don't see any at this time.
I don't have the technology, but maybe you do, King, of a map they keep showing on BBC of Syria and what land is controlled by the rebels, what land is controlled by the Syrian government. And the land where the earthquake occurred is controlled by the rebels. And the rebels then are allowing the white helmets in, but now the government is bombing the white helmets. So, you know, that map is really interesting. And then the demography of Turkey and who was in that area and why there were less enforced building codes and why the roads are harder to get into at this point in time are really interesting too. You know, it's like I tell the students at St. Cloud State when they get upset in the winter that the roads don't get plowed as often. And I remind them that the population around St. Cloud State does not vote in the highest percentage because they vote at home. And so their constituency needs are less viable to elected officials. And the same holds true right now for southern Turkey and clearly for Syria because it's rebel territory. And that, I mean, that's the politics of this disaster. But it's also a big piece of the tragedy, I think. You're an economist, you know, don't economists kind of play to the middle class or the class that keeps the economy going?
Sure.
They're-
So I agree. That's why I find the impact, the differential treatment of the response between Syria and Turkey so interesting, right? Because in some sense, I mean, I want to be fair, but I also want to do the same kind of critical analysis you would do. Is it not the case that the Syrian government views an earthquake in a rebel region as not necessarily a bad thing?
Right.
Horrible as that is to say, but it may be true.
Especially if they're bombing the White Helmets. I mean, if that's not a clue
Yeah.
that they're bombing the rescue workers, you know, I mean, if that's indeed the case, and I've seen the footage, okay, then clearly it's not like you're jumping to conclusions in some kind of prejudicial, crazy, you know, anecdote. Yeah, because they're bombing the rescuers. And these white helmets, the more I go online and look at them, they started out wanting to be part of Syrian defense unit. But when they were not being allowed by the government to go to certain places to be helpful, they split off as an independent group.
I'm trying to figure out I have an image. I'm not sure how old this is in terms of, because sometimes, and I'm going to actually the image of Mustafa for the moment. I'm going to go ahead to this one just to show you what I'm looking at, or at the moment is this. And the area that's in that lighter blue is interesting because that has had at times Turkish influence in that area. You've heard reports from Idlib, which is a much larger city in that area, but also Aleppo, which is both historically important as well as another major population center. There have been images out of Jarablus here and Manbij here. These have been scenes of incredible fighting between the rebels and Syrian forces at that time. And as if you were listening to us before, we were talking a little bit, and I guess we were live when we were chatting before we officially started the seminar. I have family background in that particular part of Syria and the little piece of Turkey that slides down the Mediterranean coast. I don't think I can, I don't know that you can see my cursor, so I don't think that's going to help. But if you look at that little piece of white that sticks down in to the west of Idlib, that is actually where my grandmother's family comes from. So I've had a long interest in this area, and it is the area of the greatest conflict between rebels and the Syrian government. So it's so complicated in how disaster response could happen. Pat, I gotta tell you, I've not seen reports of the bombing of the white helmets, but I mean, I would like to say I'm surprised by that, but I can't. And I'm not terribly surprised by that.
And now I saw that on the White Helmets website and Doctors Without Borders. So those are my two sources.
Okay, you know what, I will go look for those, but thank you for sharing that, because I want to make
Sources
sure.
are important. Yeah, that's what I always say. Sources are important.
Right,
Remember,
right.
Yep.
So that, I think with that, are there any other questions in our audience? Otherwise, I'm gonna bring today to a close, and say thank you to the audience. I want to thank you, Dr. Bodelson, for your time tonight where you are, and continued health and safety to you in Athens, and hopefully we'll see you back in St. Cloud sometime in the future.
May.
In May. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. And again, I encourage people to think about what's happening in Turkey and Syria. Pray, find reputable people to get money. Pat, do you have any suggestions for that?
The Red Crescent, Doctors Without Borders, or the American Refugee Committee. The
Yep.
American Refugee Committee is Minnesota based and fabulous. Or the White Helmets. They've got a website where you can give money to them right away too.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording and we will wish you all a good day.
Thanks.